A top Democratic leader in Washington is urging Illinois to join the expanding partisan congressional redistricting frenzy. And Governor J.B. Pritzker says federal agents being deployed in Chicago need to be held accountable for their actions. From Capital News, Illinois, it's Friday, October 24th, 2025. I'm Peter Hancock, and we'll talk about those stories and more on this edition of Capital Cast. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Capital Cast, a regular podcast of Capital News, Illinois. It started with Texas when President Donald Trump urged Republicans in the Lone Star State to redraw their congressional maps to give the GOP an extra boost in next year's midterm elections. You might remember Democrats in the Texas House fled the state and camped out here in Illinois for several days this summer as part of a tactic to protest that maneuver. And it's grown from there. Missouri, North Carolina for Republicans. Ohio is in the middle of a redistricting battle. California and Virginia could pass retaliatory maps on the Democratic side. And all the while, people have been asking whether Illinois will jump into the fray. Illinois' congressional delegation currently leans 14-3 in favor of Democrats, leading some to argue that the state is already as gerrymandered as it can get. But this week, U.S. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York openly called on Illinois to get in the game. Some might remember Mr. Jeffries was here in Springfield in August to rally Illinois Democrats ahead of the state fair. Brendan Moore has been following this story. Brendan, what is the appetite in the General Assembly for getting into another redistricting battle?
Very little, Peter, or as one Democratic lawmaker told me, maybe even less than zero. This conversation really is one-sided. It's completely coming from D.C., from Hakeem Jeffries and National Democrats, who are understandably looking at what's happening in Republican states around the country, where President Trump has essentially been goading Republican lawmakers to redraw their maps in an effort to stave off a midterm election loss. It's going to be close either way, so a few seats here or there could make an impact. And Illinois is one of the few opportunities where Democrats can fight back. The big one is California. There's talk about Virginia as well. But Illinois could potentially stretch that 14-3 map to a 15-2 map. It would look very ugly. The current map, I think most people would say, is not very easy on the eyes.
It looks pretty ugly now, yeah.
Yeah. It's very, very gerrymandered as well. The Princeton Gerrymandering Project gives it an F in fairness, in compactness, in every measure you could think of. But there is a way to make it a 15-2 map if you get creative. But the appetite is very small. Just from a logistical perspective, it's very, very difficult to do because filing for the March primary starts next week. It ends November 3rd. So you have a very, very tight window. You would probably have to move back the primary date, or at the very least change some of the petition signature requirements that are currently on candidates running for Congress. So it's very difficult from that perspective. But then also there are concerns about if you try to go for 15-2, could you dilute Democratic support in some districts and potentially make some Democrats vulnerable in a Republican wave election. And then you have a lot of black lawmakers that are concerned that about the dilution of their districts, and that could lead to a reduction in black representation in Illinois and Washington, D.C. And nothing would move in Springfield without the support of the Black Caucus. We asked the leaders of both Democratic caucuses, Senate President Don Harmon and House Speaker Chris Welch, about this effort, and they both essentially said that We understand why this conversation is happening, but we haven't seen any maps, and we have not initiated a process to redraw maps. So when lawmakers return to Springfield next week, I mean, I would say nothing is ever dead under the dome, but it's very hard to see this happening. I don't think we're going to be talking about new maps in a couple of weeks. I just think that I guess the positives for Democrats of maybe getting another seat in Illinois are outweighed by all of those potential negatives.
Meanwhile, a federal judge in Chicago is continuing to block the Trump administration's plan to deploy National Guard troops in the area. That hasn't stopped the administration from continuing its stepped up immigration enforcement actions under Operation Midway Blitz. Agents from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as Customs and Border Protection, are still on the ground, and they continue to stir controversy with some of their aggressive tactics. This week, Governor Pritzker took action aimed at holding federal authorities accountable for the way they act on the streets. Maggie Doherty has been covering that for us. She comes to us through a partnership with the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. Maggie, what can you tell us about the governor's plan here?
Yes. Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me. Governor Pritzker signed an executive order yesterday forming the Illinois Accountability Council, which will set out to investigate and document unlawful activity by federal agents. This comes amid a lot of unrest in Chicago with the federal immigration enforcement activity. And as you said, the Operation Midway Blitz. There have been many reports from the public about ICE and Customs and Border Patrol agents using excessive force either to suppress journalists or suppress protests, and the journalists covering those protests, especially at the Broadview ICE facility. And so because of all of those reports, Governor Pritzker has been saying for a while now that the public should record and take video of anything that they see that they think is unlawful activity or excessive use of force by agents. And now he's setting out to give a place where the public can actually submit those, videos and photos that they've taken. So this new commission it has a sort of three-pronged approach or three primary goals. One is to create a public record of potential abuses. They want to really look at the impact on families and communities. And then the third thing is to eventually recommend actions to prevent future harm and provide justice for past wrongs that might have happened. So they have a January 2026 deadline for which they would need to file an initial report to the public about their findings and initial recommendations.
Okay, and aside from just writing a report and making some recommendations, I mean, is there anything really that the state can do to hold federal agents accountable, or are we kind of at the mercy of the federal government here?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's unclear how much this actually will have any teeth. I think we know that there's earlier this month, U.S. District Court Judge Sarah Ellis granted a temporary restraining order blocking federal agents from using certain forceful tactics to suppress protesters or journalists. If it's in violation of that, maybe there will be some kind of recourse. I think that there's questions about that. I think that the federal government says Illinois is getting in the way of our enforcement activity, and they are not lawful in doing so. Of course, Pritzker and the Democrats would disagree with that.
Okay. Well, another big story this week played out at the Illinois State Board of Elections, where Illinois Senate President Don Harmon was facing the possibility of a $10 million fine for alleged campaign finance violations. Ben Solinsky reported on that for us. Ben, first of all, what is President Harmon accused of doing here that would justify a $10 million fine?
Yeah, here in Illinois, we have campaign finance laws that limit contributions to campaigns, particularly for candidates who are not self-funding. So what the Senate president did, as he does virtually every election, is he contributed more than $100,000 of his own money to his campaign, which will automatically remove any fundraising limits that would be in place for a candidate running for the same Senate seat that the Senate president held. Of course, Don Harmon's not really using that for himself. He's using that to support other Democratic candidates for the Senate to continue to bolster his caucus. But the issue for Don Harmon back in 2024 was that he broke the self-funding limit in January of 2023, which the State Board of Elections says would only keep fundraising limits off through the March 2024 primary. The problem that occurred here is that the Senate president continued to raise unlimited amounts of money after that primary election, and the State Board of Elections found that the contribution limit should have been reinstated after that primary election. Now, the Senate president is arguing through his attorney that the contribution limits should actually remain off all the way through 2026 because Don Harmon wasn't even on the ballot in the 2024 election. So it's a very complicated kind of nuanced situation of state campaign finance laws, which a hearing officer has recommended that he have to pay a $10 million fine for violating.
Okay, so the hearing officer says $10 million fine. He appeals to the State Board of Elections. What happened? This is where it gets really interesting. What happened at the State Board?
Where it also gets very complicated because Harmon went through the usual hearing process. In August, a hearing officer heard the case from his attorney who made the arguments that I was describing there. And then the hearing officer recommended that the Senate president still did indeed violate state laws, and the board should vote to vote to approve a $10 million fine for Don Harmon's campaign. The problem with the State Board of Elections is it is a 4-4 group made up of 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, and it takes 5 votes to create any sort of action for the board. So naturally, we saw a 4-4 vote with the Democrats siding with Don Harmon and the Republicans saying that actually Don Harmon should be fined. And we ended up in a deadlock situation. And things got really complicated during this meeting because the State Board of Elections deputy attorney, she recommended, well, because we saw a 4-4 vote, that means that the board did not accept Don Harmon's arguments, and therefore he should still pay a fine. But the problem is it requires 5 votes for the board to have an action approved. And obviously we didn't get those 5 votes. So there was more than an hour-long argument over this. And ultimately the board decided that they're going to take the next month to look at this so the attorneys can kind of confer about what's going on here. And we'll probably get an answer at the November 18th State Board of Elections meeting. That answer is more than likely going to be that Don Harmon does not have to pay a fine because 5 board members did not approve the fine.
Okay, and so you and I have talked about this in the office, and I've mentioned that if I was sitting around waiting for some board to decide whether or not I owed a $10 million fine, I would be freaking out right now. Don Harmon is not, because he's not the one who's going to have to pay the $10 million, right?
Exactly. The fine would come out of his campaign account, which is obviously the Senate president has put in a lot of money of his own, but the vast majority of that has come from donors, union groups, businesses, you name it. And that's a ton of money that he's raised. He has well over $10 million in his account. I think it's around $16 million. So if he had to pay this fine, it would be a massive hit to his political power to, use this money that he has. But at the end of the day, it's not his own money, and he will still have millions of dollars to use on races that I'm sure he will be able to fundraise very easily back.
So he's not going to have to skip any meals or miss a rent payment, right?
No, not at all.
Okay. Well, in sadder news, we also want to extend our condolences this week to Darren Bailey and his family. Bailey is a former state senator, of course, who was the Republican candidate for governor in 2022 and is running again for the GOP nomination in 2026. On Wednesday, 4 members of his family, his son, his daughter-in-law, and 2 grandchildren, died in a tragic helicopter crash in Montana. Ben, you wrote about this. What can you tell us? What happened there?
Yeah, all we really know is Darren Bailey's son, Zachary, is a helicopter pilot, has been a helicopter pilot for many years, and he was on his way to Montana for something it sounds like maybe had to do with his business. And his helicopter crashed for unknown reasons just over the South Dakota state line into Montana. All we know is the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, is investigating this, but several members of Darren Bailey's family were on board. He has 4 children, 13 grandchildren. Certainly a unimaginable loss for Darren Bailey.
Well, our condolences go out to him and his entire family. Meanwhile, I want to look ahead to next week because we have quite a few things coming up. Monday is the first day that candidates for state and federal offices can turn in their petitions to get on the March primary election ballot. This is always kind of a big event, kind of a tradition, and it's really fun to hang out in the parking lot of the State Board of Elections office here in Springfield or Chicago or wherever, just to kind of see who shows up. Brendan, can you explain, though, why there is always a competition to be at the front of the line on petition filing day?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, it's become a tradition. It's kind of a spectacle out there at the Board of Elections on MacArthur in Springfield. The competition, though, is because if you are in line at 8 o'clock, you are considered first. So even if you're at the very end of that line, down by Chuck E. Cheese at the end of the strip mall, and you don't get processed until 10:45, it'll say you were in line at 8 o'clock and you filed at 8 o'clock. And that enters you into a drawing to get a first ballot spot in your race. And candidates are very superstitious about this. There's no real political science study that shows you have an advantage being the first name on a ballot, but a lot of candidates and people that work in politics say that it could be good for a few percentage points, especially if it's a lesser known race with lesser known candidates, or if there's like 20 candidates, as we might see in some of these very tightly contested congressional races. So that competition for that first spot is fierce. Basically, everybody that files at 8 o'clock will be entered into that drawing, which will be held at a later date. And then people that file in the middle of the week, it'll just kind of be in that order of whoever filed. And then the following Monday, on November 3rd, at 4 o'clock, anybody that's filed in that last hour will be in a competition to get the last spot on the ballot, which there's also a kind of a competition for, although less so than the first spot on the ballot. It's always kind of fun to see who's out there in line. I expect hundreds of people out there on Monday. Let's just hope it's a little bit warmer than it has been in past years.
It has been kind of chilly in past years, and it's been a little bit chilly this week as well. But as you said this, and it's always kind of piqued my interest, there's really no evidence that being listed first on the ballot or being listed last on the ballot, while it might be easier for a voter's eye to see it, there's really no evidence that gives you a mathematical advantage in an election. Is that right?
No. That's right. I mean, I haven't ever seen a political science study, academic study that shows that the candidate that's listed first has an advantage over the candidate listed like sixth or in the middle of a lot of other candidates. But it is one of those things that you will never convince candidates and political operatives that it doesn't make a difference. It's kind of like campaign science. The people say, they don't vote, doesn't really matter, but candidates are always going to insist upon having campaign signs everywhere. Same is true in Illinois with trying to be first on the ballot.
Well, and it raises the question, a lot of states have laws requiring a sort of randomized name rotation on the ballot so that nobody is at the top of the ballot on every single ballot. rotates around by precinct and even within a precinct. Sometimes they juggle them around when they print the ballots. But Illinois doesn't have that. Has there ever been any talk about just going to an automatic ballot rotation so that we don't have this controversy anymore?
I'm not sure about that, Peter. I'm sure it has been discussed. There are always so many bills in the elections committees in the House and Senate. A lot of interesting ideas. I mean, they've talked about like ranked choice voting, for instance, and a lot of other ideas to reform how we do our elections in Illinois. But this has been something that is ever since I've been covering the beat, just kind of been a long-standing tradition of, it just the ballot order is the order in which you file. And again, if 8 candidates file in the same race at 8 o'clock, then they're going to have a drawing, fight it out to see who gets that coveted first spot. But it would not surprise me if that is part of a conversation in the future about how do we make elections maybe a little more fair and maybe not have to show up at 8 a.m. on a bone-chilled day in Springfield just to file your petitions and try to get that first spot.
Okay. Well, we did mention earlier that this coming week is also the final week of the fall veto session. Very little happened in week one. In fact, of the 3 days, I think the Senate canceled one day, and the House ended up doing very little on the third day of the first week. What about week two? Ben, is there anything you're looking to happen in the coming week? Any major legislation?
Yeah, it feels like one of those weeks where either nothing's going to happen again or everything is going to happen. It's kind of how Springfield goes. So, we're certainly watching a few big issues. Public transportation reform is the one everybody's talking about. We've talked about it exhaustively. There's really no indication even now here on Friday afternoon which way the General Assembly is going to go with this, if this is an issue they will take up. They don't have to take it up. They can wait and figure this out in the spring because the fiscal cliff doesn't take effect for the CTA in Chicago until more than likely July of next year. But I think lawmakers want to get it done. They have been discussing this for well over a year now. There's been countless hours of hearings on this at this point. But they seem to be struggling to reach agreements over funding issues, how this is going to be funded. I know I've heard from some downstate Democrats who just aren't sold on this entire concept of, raising taxes to fund public transportation because, a lot of their constituents might end up, paying for some of these taxes as well. And they don't necessarily use public transportation at all in their communities or certainly not in the Chicago area very often. So I think that's one of the biggest things we're watching for. There's other issues on the table, such as energy reform that we're hearing about. So I think it'll be a busy week of negotiating and discussion. We'll see if it's a busy week of voting.
Okay. Brendan, anything you're watching next week?
Yeah, Ben mentioned the two big items, but there are a couple other things that are kind of hanging out there. I would look for maybe an immigration package at kind of as a legislative response to ICE activity in Chicago. There's a proposal that would ban civil immigration arrests in state courthouses that I think could be put into a larger package. There's talk of maybe making some adjustments to the state's Trust Act. And there might be a few other items thrown in there too. The state's kind of limited in what it can do. Obviously, there's a suit primacy clause issue here. The federal government has a lot of leeway to conduct its operations across the country, but I do think that lawmakers are eager to do something about what's happening in Chicago. One other thing I'll mention too is we could see a gambling bill move. This would authorize a casino in Decatur and remove a provision from the 2019 gaming expansion law that allowed for Hawthorne Race Course in Chicago to essentially have a veto over the development of a new racetrack and casino in southern Cook County. So this would maybe clear the way for another developer to come in and build a new development, which would help the state's racing industry and also generate some new revenue from the gaming aspect for the state.
Okay, well, on one final note, I did want to mention that the 2025 Illinois report card comes out next week. These are accountability reports that not only show how well students overall are doing in reading and math, but also how schools are doing and how districts are doing and how the students within them are performing. This will be the first report under a new grading system that is supposed to be more fair and reflect more accurately the proficiency rates for reading and writing and math among Illinois students. A lot of people believe that the old system set the bar too high and was showing unfairly that too many students were below the proficiency levels in both reading and math. These reports also have a wealth of other information about the overall state of K-12 education in Illinois, including graduation rates, information about the teaching workforce, and a lot more. So look for reports about that toward the end of next week. You've been listening to Capital Cast. Capital Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a public affairs reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation with funding from the Robert R. McCormick Foundation. I want to thank my colleagues Brendan Moore, Ben Selensky, and Maggie Doherty for being here this week. Until next time, on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team, this is Peter Hancock saying thank you for listening.